You know, there is something most peculiar about the way we have come to regard money in our time. We speak of it as if it were the most solid, the most real thing in our world. We pursue it with a fervor that would make the medieval mystic envious. We measure our worth by it, plan our lives around it, sacrifice our deepest longings for it. And yet, if you truly examine this thing we call money, you will find that it is perhaps the greatest illusion ever created by the human mind. I have spent many years observing the curious ways in which the human psyche operates, and I have come to understand that what we believe to be most concrete is often what is most ethereal. What we think is saving us is frequently what is destroying us, and nowhere is this more apparent than in our relationship with money. For you see, money is not what it appears to be. It is not wealth. It is not security. It is not freedom. Money is a symbol, nothing more, a representation of value that exists only because we have agreed collectively to believe in its power. But here is where the trap reveals itself. In our pursuit of this symbol, we have forgotten what it was meant to represent. We have become so mesmerized by the representation that we have lost sight of the reality it was supposed to point toward. It is as if we were starving men who became so fascinated by the menu that we forgot to order the meal. And in this forgetting, in this confusion between symbol and substance, we have created our own prison. The poor man dreams of money and believes that once he has it, his troubles will end. The rich man accumulates money and discovers that his troubles have only just begun. Both are caught in the same illusion, you see. Both are chasing shadows while the sun sets behind them. They are pursuing something that cannot give them what they truly seek, because what they truly seek cannot be purchased, cannot be accumulated, cannot be possessed in the way that money can be possessed. I want you to consider something with me. When did you first learn about money? Not the coins and bills themselves, but the idea of money, the concept that certain objects could be exchanged for the things you needed or wanted. If you reflect deeply enough, you will likely find that you learned about money before you learned about value. You were taught to desire the symbol before you understood what it symbolized. And this, I believe, is where the great confusion begins. We are born into a world where the symbol has already replaced the reality in the minds of those around us. Our parents, our teachers, our society, they all speak of money as if it were the thing itself rather than merely pointing toward the thing. They tell us we need money to be happy, money to be secure, money to be free. But they do not tell us what happiness actually is, what security truly means, what freedom really requires. And so we grow up pursuing the symbol while remaining ignorant of the substance. This is not merely a matter of economics, you understand. This is a psychological phenomenon of the deepest kind. When we mistake the symbol for the reality, we create what I have come to recognize as a kind of spiritual poverty that no amount of material wealth can cure. We become like a man dying of thirst who refuses to drink water because he is too busy counting pictures of wells. The very thing that was meant to serve us becomes our master, and we become its slaves without ever realizing what has happened. I have observed this pattern countless times in my work with individuals. A man comes to me, successful by every external measure, wealthy beyond the dreams of most, and yet he is empty, anxious, disconnected from himself and others. He has spent his life accumulating the symbols of success, but he has never learned what success actually means. He has gathered representations of value without ever discovering what he truly values. And now, surrounded by all the things money can buy, he finds himself poorer than he was when he began. Or consider the woman who spends her days worrying about money, calculating and recalculating her expenses, lying awake at night consumed by financial anxiety. She has enough to meet her basic needs, perhaps even her wants, but she cannot see this because her vision has been clouded by the illusion. She sees only scarcity where abundance exists, only danger where safety prevails, only poverty where wealth surrounds her. The money is not the problem. Her relationship to the idea of money is the problem. This is what I mean when I speak of the illusion of money trapping us in poverty. It is not that money itself is evil or that we should reject it entirely. Money as a tool can be quite useful. The problem arises when we forget that it is a tool and begin to worship it as if it were a god. When we do this, we create a kind of psychological inversion where the means becomes the end, where the servant becomes the master, where the map becomes more important than the territory it is meant to describe. The unconscious mind, you see, does not distinguish between symbol and reality in the way that the conscious mind believes it does. When we focus obsessively on money, when we make it the center of our attention and the goal of our efforts, the unconscious begins to treat it as if it were the actual source of what we seek. But money is not the source of security. Security comes from within, from a deep trust in one's ability to meet life's challenges. Money is not the source of freedom. Freedom comes from the liberation of the spirit, from the ability to choose one's response to any situation. Money is not the source of happiness. Happiness emerges from the alignment between one's outer life and inner nature. When we pursue money believing it will give us these things, we are pursuing an impossibility. We are trying to find the interior through the exterior, the spiritual through the material, the infinite through the finite. And this pursuit, no matter how successful it appears to be, will always leave us feeling empty because we are looking for something in a place where it cannot be found. But here is what makes this illusion so particularly insidious. The more we chase money, the more we reinforce our belief that we do not have enough. Every dollar we earn tells us that we needed that dollar, which implies that we were lacking before we earned it. Every purchase we make reminds us that there are countless other things we cannot yet afford. Every financial goal we achieve simply reveals new financial goals that lie beyond our current reach. The pursuit itself creates the very sense of poverty it promises to eliminate. This is why you will often find that those who have the most money are among the most anxious about it. They have spent so long focusing on accumulation that they have trained their minds to see only what is missing, never what is present. They have become experts at recognizing scarcity and amateurs at recognizing abundance. Their wealth exists in their bank accounts, but not in their consciousness. And it is consciousness, not bank accounts, that determines whether we experience ourselves as rich or poor. I remember speaking with a man who had built a considerable fortune through his business endeavors. He came to me not because his business was failing, but because he felt as though he were failing despite his business success. He told me that no matter how much money he made, he could not shake the feeling that he was always on the verge of losing everything. He worked longer hours, made more money, and felt more insecure. He expanded his business, increased his profits, and deepened his anxiety. The money was growing, but so was his poverty of spirit. As we spoke, it became clear that his relationship with money had become a kind of addiction, not an addiction to the physical substance of money, but an addiction to the feeling of pursuing it. He had become dependent on the temporary relief that came with each financial success, and like any addict, he needed more and more of his drug to achieve the same effect. But the relief was always temporary, and the underlying anxiety always returned, stronger than before. This man had fallen into what I have come to understand as one of the deepest traps the human psyche can create for itself. He had made money into a solution for a problem that money cannot solve. He was trying to use the external world to fix something that was broken in his internal world. And the more he focused on the external solution, the more he neglected the internal problem, which continued to grow stronger in the darkness of his neglect. You see, when we make money the answer to our deepest fears and longings, we are essentially asking it to do something it was never designed to do. Money can purchase goods and services. It can provide certain forms of convenience and comfort. It can offer specific types of opportunities and experiences. But it cannot touch the parts of us that most need healing. It cannot fill the emptiness that comes from being disconnected from our true nature. It cannot quiet the anxiety that arises when we do not trust ourselves or our place in the world. And yet, because we have been taught to believe that money can do these things, we keep trying to make it work. We keep pushing this square peg into a round hole, growing more frustrated with each failed attempt, but never questioning whether we might be using the wrong tool altogether. We blame ourselves for not having enough money, not earning it fast enough, not managing it well enough. We rarely stop to ask whether money was ever capable of giving us what we thought it could give us. This is how the illusion perpetuates itself. Our failures with money convince us that we need more money, not that we need a different relationship with money. Our financial anxiety persuades us that we must focus more intensely on finances, not that we must learn to find peace independent of our financial situation. Our sense of poverty drives us to accumulate more wealth, not to discover the wealth that already exists within us. And so we remain trapped, not by our circumstances, but by our beliefs about our circumstances. Not by what we have or do not have, but by what we think we need to have. Not by money itself, but by the stories we tell ourselves about money and what it means and what it can do for us. The prison is invisible, but it is no less real for being unseen. The bars are made of thoughts, the locks are made of beliefs, and the key has been in our pocket all along. But let me tell you something even more curious about this strange relationship we have formed with money. I have noticed that those who speak most constantly about it, who make it the subject of their daily conversations and nightly dreams, these are often the very people who understand it least. They know its numbers, perhaps, its fluctuations and calculations, but they do not comprehend its nature. They are like scholars who have memorized every word of a poem written in a language they do not speak. For money, you see, is fundamentally a language. It is a way of communicating value, of expressing exchange, of speaking about worth. But we have forgotten that it is merely the words, not the meaning they convey. We have become so fascinated by the grammar that we have lost track of what we were trying to say. And in this forgetting, we have created a most peculiar form of muteness. We speak constantly in the language of money, but we can no longer say what we actually mean. I think of the young clerk who works 12 hours each day, saving every penny, denying himself the simplest pleasures, because he believes that someday, when he has accumulated enough, he will finally be able to live. But what is he saving for really? What life is he preparing for? If you ask him, he cannot tell you, not in any concrete terms. He speaks of security, of comfort, of freedom, but these are just more symbols layered upon symbols. He has never stopped to examine what security would actually feel like, what comfort would actually provide, what freedom would actually allow him to do. This man is not saving money. He is saving the idea of money. He is accumulating symbols of symbols, representations of representations. And each day that passes, each penny that is added to his growing pile, takes him further from the life he believes he is preparing for. Because life, real life, is not something you prepare for. Life is something you live, and you cannot live it by proxy. You cannot experience it through symbols. The wealthy merchant faces the same dilemma, though he would never admit it. He has accumulated vast sums, owns properties and investments beyond counting, yet he finds himself working harder than ever. Not because he needs more money, you understand, but because he has forgotten how to do anything else. The accumulation has become its own purpose. The means has so completely replaced the end that he can no longer remember what the end was supposed to be. When I observe such a man, I see something quite tragic. He has spent so many years learning to see the world through the lens of money that he has lost the ability to see it any other way. Everything becomes a calculation, every relationship a transaction, every moment an opportunity cost. He has taught himself to think like money, and in doing so, he has forgotten how to think like a human being. This is what I mean when I say that money has become our master. It is not that money controls us through some external force. It is that we have internalized its logic so completely that it now controls us from within. We have adopted its values as our values, its priorities as our priorities, its way of measuring worth as our way of measuring worth, and we have done this so gradually, so unconsciously, that we do not even realize it has happened. The unconscious mind, you must understand, is far more susceptible to this kind of influence than we typically recognize. When we repeatedly expose ourselves to any particular way of thinking, any specific set of values, the unconscious begins to organize itself around these patterns. It starts to filter all experience through this lens, to interpret all reality according to these rules. And money, with its seemingly objective numbers and apparently rational calculations, is particularly seductive to the unconscious, because it offers the illusion of certainty in an uncertain world. But certainty about what? This is the question we rarely ask. When a man tells me he feels secure because he has money in the bank, I ask him, secure from what? When a woman says she feels free because she can afford anything she wants, I ask her, free to do what? When someone claims that money gives them peace of mind, I wonder, peace from what kind of mind? These questions often reveal something quite startling. The security that money provides is security from imaginary dangers. The freedom it offers is freedom to pursue things we do not actually want. The peace it brings is peace from anxieties that money itself has created. We have constructed an elaborate solution to problems that exist primarily in our own minds, and then we have forgotten that the problems were our own creation. I remember a conversation with a woman who had inherited considerable wealth from her family. She came to me because, despite having more money than she could spend in several lifetimes, she was consumed by financial worry. She checked her investments daily, agonized over every expenditure, lived in constant fear of economic collapse. When I asked her what she was afraid would happen if she lost her money, she could not give me a clear answer. As we explored this together, it became apparent that her fear was not really about money at all. It was about worthiness, about belonging, about having a place in the world. She had been raised in a family where money was the primary language of love, where financial success was the only recognized form of achievement, where net worth and personal worth had become completely entangled in her mind. To lose money, in her unconscious understanding, would be to lose herself. This woman was not afraid of poverty in any material sense. She was afraid of the psychological poverty that she believed would follow financial loss. She was not protecting her money. She was protecting her identity. But because her identity had become so thoroughly merged with her financial status, protecting one required obsessing over the other. She had become a prisoner of her own wealth, trapped by the very thing that was supposed to set her free. This is the deeper trap that money sets for us. It does not simply promise to solve our external problems. It offers to solve our internal problems as well. It suggests that our feelings of inadequacy, our sense of insecurity, our fear of not being enough, all of these can be addressed through accumulation. And because these internal problems are so painful, because they touch the most vulnerable parts of ourselves, we are willing to believe almost anything that promises relief from them. But internal problems cannot be solved through external means. This is one of the fundamental laws of human psychology, as reliable as any law of physics. You cannot heal shame by accumulating symbols of success. You cannot cure loneliness by purchasing the tools of connection. You cannot resolve the fear of death by building monuments to your own importance. The attempt to do so is like trying to satisfy hunger by looking at pictures of food. And yet, this is precisely what our culture encourages us to do. We are told that every internal state has an external solution, that every psychological need can be met through material acquisition. Feel insecure? Buy something that makes you look successful? Feel unloved? Purchase something that makes you attractive? Feel meaningless? Accumulate something that makes you important? The market, it seems, has an answer for every existential question, but these answers do not answer anything. They simply provide temporary distractions from the questions. And when the distraction wears off, as it always does, the questions return stronger than before. Because now, in addition to our original problem, we have the added problem of wondering why the solution did not work. We blame ourselves, we blame our circumstances, we blame everything except the fundamental impossibility of what we were trying to do. I have seen people spend decades in this cycle, accumulating and consuming, achieving and acquiring, always believing that the next purchase, the next investment, the next financial milestone will finally bring them what they seek. They are like a man trying to catch his own shadow, running faster and faster, but never getting any closer to his goal. The shadow is always there, always visible, always just out of reach. The tragedy is not that they fail to catch the shadow. The tragedy is that they never turn around to see the sun that is casting it. They never realize that what they are chasing is merely the absence of light, that what they seek is already present in the very source of the shadow they pursue. The wealth they long for, the security they crave, the freedom they desire, all of this exists within them, has always existed within them, is in fact the very thing that makes the chase possible. But to see this, to really understand it, requires something that money cannot buy. It requires the courage to stop running, to stand still, to look within. It requires the willingness to face our internal poverty directly, not as something shameful to be hidden or solved, but as something natural to be understood and integrated. It requires us to question not just our relationship to money, but our relationship to ourselves. This is perhaps the most difficult thing I can ask of you, because it means releasing the very thing you believe is protecting you. It means stepping away from the pursuit that has organized your entire life. It means admitting that you have been looking for something in a place where it cannot be found, and that the looking itself has become part of what keeps you from finding it. But consider this possibility. What if the poverty you fear is not the absence of money, but the absence of connection to your own inner wealth? What if the security you seek is not financial stability, but the deep knowing that you can meet whatever life brings to you? What if the freedom you desire is not the ability to buy anything, but the liberation from needing to buy anything in order to feel complete? These questions point toward a different kind of wealth entirely, a wealth that no economic system can measure, no market can evaluate, no bank can store. It is the wealth of being fully alive to your own experience, fully present to your own existence, fully aware of the richness that surrounds you in every moment. This wealth cannot be accumulated because it is not separate from you. It cannot be lost because it is not external to you. It cannot be stolen because it is not an object that can be possessed. And yet, this recognition brings with it a most peculiar terror. Because if you cannot accumulate this inner wealth, if you cannot lose it, if you cannot measure it against your neighbor's portion, then what becomes of the entire structure upon which you have built your understanding of success? What happens to the careful hierarchy of worth that society has taught you to climb? What meaning do your achievements possess if they were never the true measure of your value? I've watched people approach this realization and then retreat from it as if they had glimpsed something too bright for their eyes to bear. They return to their calculations, their accumulations, their endless comparisons, because the familiar prison feels safer than the unknown freedom. They would rather remain trapped in a system they understand than step into a reality they cannot control. But the soul, you see, will not be denied forever. There comes a moment in every life when the symbols cease to satisfy, when the representations no longer represent anything meaningful, when the whole elaborate structure of financial meaning begins to crumble, not from external pressure, but from internal emptiness. This is what I have come to recognize as the great crisis of the modern individual, the moment when the carefully constructed edifice of monetary purpose reveals itself to be built upon nothing more substantial than collective agreement. I think of the businessman who suffered what others called a nervous breakdown, though I prefer to call it a breakthrough. He had spent 30 years building an empire, accumulating wealth beyond measure, achieving every goal he had set for himself. And then one morning he woke up and could not remember why any of it mattered. Not the money, not the success, not the recognition, none of it held any meaning for him whatsoever. He sat in his office surrounded by the symbols of his achievement and felt as empty as if he possessed nothing at all. His colleagues thought he had lost his mind, but I understood that he had found it. The spell had been broken. The illusion had lifted. He could see clearly, perhaps for the first time in decades, that he had been chasing phantoms, pursuing mirages, dedicating his life to things that existed only in the shared imagination of those around him. The money was still there, the business still operated, the bank accounts still held their numbers, but the magic was gone. The symbols had revealed themselves to be merely symbols. This man came to me not because he wanted to restore the spell, but because he wanted to understand what lay beyond it. He had discovered that there was something in him that no amount of money could purchase, something that remained untouched by all his accumulation, something that was neither increased by his wealth nor diminished by his poverty, and this discovery, rather than depressing him, filled him with a kind of wonder he had not experienced since childhood. What he had found, though he did not yet have words for it, was his own essential nature, that part of himself that exists independent of any external circumstance, that core of being that no market can evaluate, no economy can affect, no financial system can touch. He had discovered that he was wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with money, secure in ways that transcended any bank balance, free in ways that no purchase could provide. But here is what makes this discovery both liberating and terrifying. Once you have seen through the illusion of money, you cannot simply return to your old relationship with it. You cannot pretend that it means what you once believed it meant. You cannot pursue it with the same urgency, worship it with the same devotion, fear its absence with the same intensity. The game has changed, and you can no longer play by the old rules. This does not mean that money becomes irrelevant. It means that money takes its proper place as one tool among many, one consideration among several, one aspect of life, rather than the central organizing principle around which everything else revolves. You begin to see it for what it actually is, rather than what you imagined it to be. And what it actually is far less powerful and far less important than what you imagined it to be. I have observed that people who reach this understanding often go through a period of disorientation. They feel as though they are walking through a familiar landscape that has suddenly become foreign. The streets look the same, the buildings appear unchanged, but everything means something different now. Conversations about money that once seemed urgent now feel like discussions about the weather. Worries about financial security that once kept them awake now seem as distant as childhood fears of monsters under the bed. This disorientation is natural and necessary. It is the psychological equivalent of learning to walk again after discovering that you have been crawling all your life. The muscles are different, the balance is different, the entire relationship to movement is different. For a time, you may feel less stable than you did before, less certain of your footing, but this instability is not weakness. It is the temporary confusion that comes with expanding your possibilities. The woman I mentioned earlier, the one who inherited her family's wealth, eventually reached this point in her own journey. She came to understand that her obsession with money was really an obsession with avoiding the deeper questions of her existence. Who was she beyond her bank balance? What did she value beyond what could be purchased? How could she contribute to the world in ways that had nothing to do with financial transactions? These questions initially frightened her because she had no ready answers. She had spent so many years defining herself through her relationship to money that she had never developed any other form of self-understanding. She was like a person who had worn a mask for so long that she had forgotten what her actual face looked like underneath. The mask had become her identity, and removing it felt like erasing herself. But gradually, patiently, she began to discover aspects of herself that had been hidden beneath the financial identity. She found that she had a deep appreciation for beauty that had nothing to do with what things cost. She discovered talents and interests that she had never pursued because they offered no financial reward. She realized that some of her most meaningful relationships were with people who neither knew nor cared about her wealth. As these discoveries accumulated, a remarkable transformation occurred. She did not become poor, did not lose her money, did not reject material comfort. Instead, she became rich in ways she had never imagined possible. Rich in curiosity, rich in connection, rich in purpose, rich in the simple pleasure of being alive and aware. The money was still there, but it had shrunk to its proper proportions. It was no longer the sun around which everything else orbited. It had become merely one planet among many in a much larger solar system. I want you to understand that this transformation is available to anyone, regardless of their financial circumstances. You do not need to have money to be trapped by the illusion of money, and you do not need to lose money to be freed from this illusion. The poverty I am describing is not material poverty. It is psychological poverty, spiritual poverty the poverty that comes from believing that your worth is determined by your wealth. I have known people with very little money who lived as kings, and people with vast fortunes who lived as beggars. The difference was not in their bank accounts. The difference was in their understanding of what constitutes true wealth. Those who lived as kings understood that they possessed something that could not be taken from them, something that did not fluctuate with market conditions, something that was theirs by birthright rather than by achievement. Those who lived as beggars had confused themselves with their circumstances, had mistaken their bank balance for their being. The curious thing is that when you stop chasing money as if it were the answer to life's deepest questions, you often find that money comes more easily. Not because you have learned some secret technique of accumulation, but because you are no longer approaching it from a place of desperation. You are no longer trying to make it do something it cannot do, no longer asking it to fill holes it cannot fill, no longer demanding that it provide what it cannot provide. When you understand that money is simply a tool, you can use it skillfully. When you realize that it is merely a symbol, you can interpret it accurately. When you recognize that it is only one aspect of a much larger reality, you can relate to it proportionately. Your relationship with money becomes functional rather than emotional, practical rather than magical, realistic rather than fantastical. But this shift requires something that most people are reluctant to provide. It requires you to face your own inner emptiness without trying to fill it with external things. It requires you to acknowledge your insecurities without trying to purchase security. It requires you to accept your mortality without trying to buy immortality. It requires you to be human without trying to become a god through accumulation. This facing of what is real rather than what is imagined, this acceptance of what is true rather than what is comfortable, this willingness to be authentic rather than impressive, this is the beginning of genuine wealth. Not wealth as the world defines it, but wealth as the soul recognizes it. Not the wealth that can be counted, but the wealth that truly counts. Not the wealth that makes you feel superior to others, but the wealth that makes you feel connected to everything. And perhaps most importantly, it requires you to trust that you are enough as you are, that you have always been enough, that your value does not need to be earned or proven or accumulated. This trust flies in the face of everything our culture teaches us. We are told constantly that we are insufficient, that we need more, that we must acquire and achieve and accumulate in order to become worthy of love, respect, and happiness. But what if this teaching is itself the source of our poverty? What if the belief that we are not enough is what creates the desperate hunger for more? What if the conviction that we must earn our worth is what keeps us forever feeling worthless? What if the very premise upon which our economic system is built, the idea that scarcity is natural and abundance must be created through effort, is fundamentally false? I have come to believe that abundance is our natural state, and scarcity is the artificial creation of minds that have forgotten their own essential nature. We are born into a world of infinite possibility, surrounded by beauty, breathing freely, alive and aware and capable of wonder. This is wealth beyond measure, but we are taught to overlook this wealth, to take it for granted, to search instead for the pale imitations that money can provide. The air you breathe costs nothing, yet without it you would die in minutes. The sunlight that warms you is free, yet without it life on earth would be impossible. The water that flows in rivers and falls from the sky asks no payment, yet it is more precious than gold. Your ability to see, to hear, to think, to feel, to love, to create, these capacities that make life worth living, none of them can be purchased. They are given freely, abundantly, without condition. When you begin to recognize this freely given abundance that surrounds you always, the artificial scarcity that money represents begins to lose its power over you. You realize that you have been wealthy all along, that you have been swimming in an ocean of abundance while convinced that you were dying of thirst. This recognition does not solve all problems, does not eliminate all challenges, but it fundamentally changes your relationship to whatever problems and challenges remain. Problems and challenges remain. You begin to see then that the trap is not in the money itself, but in the way we have learned to think about it. We have created an entire mythology around these pieces of paper and metal coins, a mythology so compelling that we have forgotten it is a myth at all. And like all powerful myths, this one shapes not only how we see the world, but how we see ourselves within it. I have noticed something quite remarkable in my observations of human nature. When a person speaks of being worth a certain amount of money, they are revealing something profound about how they have learned to measure their own existence. They have confused their net worth with their self-worth, their bank balance with their essential being. This confusion runs so deep that many people cannot imagine who they would be without it. But tell me, what were you worth on the day you were born? What was your market value as an infant crying in your mother's arms? The very question seems absurd, does it not? And yet, somewhere between that moment of pure being and this moment of endless calculating, you learn to attach a price tag to your own existence. You began to believe that you could be measured, evaluated, compared, bought, and sold like any other commodity in the marketplace. This learning did not happen all at once. It was gradual, subtle, like the way water slowly carves stone. First, perhaps, you noticed that some children had more toys than others, and that these toys seemed to bring them a kind of attention, a form of envy, a type of power. Then you observed that adults spoke differently to those who dressed well, who lived in fine houses, who drove impressive automobiles. You began to understand, without anyone directly teaching you, that appearance mattered, that possessions spoke a language that others respected. And so you learned to speak this language too. You learned to present yourself in ways that would communicate your value to others. You learned to accumulate the symbols that would announce your worth. You learned to fear the loss of these symbols because you had come to believe that losing them would mean losing yourself. The trap was set, and you walked into it willingly, even eagerly, because it promised to solve the very problem it was creating. For you see, the problem was never that you lacked worth. The problem was that you had learned to doubt your inherent worth. And money, with all its apparent objectivity, seemed to offer a solution to this doubt. If you could accumulate enough of it, surely no one could question your value. If you could earn enough of it, surely you could silence the voice within you that whispered of inadequacy. If you could possess enough of it, surely you could purchase the respect, the love, the acceptance that you craved. But here is what I have discovered through decades of listening to the human soul in all its complexity. The voice that whispers of inadequacy is not silenced by external accumulation. It is fed by it. Each dollar earned to prove your worth proves that your worth needed proving. Each purchase made to demonstrate your success demonstrates that your success was in question. Each investment made to secure your future reveals that your present feels insecure. The unconscious mind, you must understand, is a most literal interpreter. When you repeatedly act as if your value depends upon your wealth, the unconscious concludes that your value does indeed depend upon your wealth. When you consistently behave as if you are insufficient without money, the unconscious accepts that you are insufficient without money. When you persistently worry about financial security, the unconscious learns that there is something to worry about. And so you create the very reality you fear, not through some mystical law of attraction, but through the simple psychological principle that we become what we repeatedly think and feel and believe ourselves to be. If you think poor thoughts, you will feel poor regardless of your bank balance. If you harbor scarcity beliefs, you will experience scarcity even in the midst of abundance. If you carry the identity of someone who never has enough, you will never have enough no matter how much you accumulate. I recall a conversation with a gentleman who had achieved what most would consider extraordinary financial success. He owned multiple businesses, held investments in various enterprises, lived in a magnificent home surrounded by beautiful objects. Yet he came to me tormented by dreams of poverty, plagued by nightmares of losing everything, unable to enjoy what he had earned because he was so terrified of its disappearance. As we explored his inner landscape together, a curious pattern emerged. This man had grown up in genuine material poverty. His family had struggled to meet basic needs, had known real hunger, real want, real insecurity. As a child, he had promised himself that he would never experience such conditions again. He would work harder than anyone, earn more than anyone, accumulate enough to protect himself from ever returning to that state of helplessness. But the child who made that promise had misunderstood something fundamental about the nature of security. He believed that security came from having enough money to prevent poverty. What he discovered too late was that security comes from knowing you can handle poverty if it comes. The first kind of security is always fragile because it depends on circumstances beyond your control. The second kind of security is unshakable because it depends on something within you that no external force can touch. This man had spent his entire adult life building a fortress to protect himself from a fear that lived inside the fortress. He had accumulated money to defend against poverty, but the poverty he feared was not material poverty. It was the psychological poverty he had experienced as a child, the feeling of powerlessness, of vulnerability, of not being able to trust that life would provide what was needed. No amount of money could heal that inner wound, because that wound existed in a realm where money has no power. This is what I mean when I speak of the illusion trapping us in poverty. The real poverty is not the lack of money. The real poverty is the lack of trust in ourselves, in life, in the fundamental abundance that surrounds us always. And money, rather than curing this poverty, often makes it worse because it gives us something external to depend upon, which means we never learn to depend upon what is internal and therefore truly reliable. Think of it this way. When you were learning to walk as a child, what would have happened if someone had carried you everywhere? You would have remained dependent on others for mobility. You would never have developed your own strength, your own balance, your own confidence in your ability to move through the world. The carrying, however well-intentioned, would have crippled you. This is precisely what happens when we use money to carry us through psychological terrain. We need to learn to navigate ourselves. When we use wealth to buy confidence instead of developing genuine self-assurance, when we use possessions to purchase identity instead of discovering who we really are, when we use financial security to avoid facing our fears, instead of learning to be courageous in the face of uncertainty, we remain psychologically crippled. We become dependent on external supports for internal strength. I have observed this pattern countless times, and it never ceases to amaze me how persistent it is. A person will come to me suffering from anxiety, and when we explore the roots of this anxiety, we often discover that it stems from a fear of not having enough. Not enough money, not enough success, not enough recognition, not enough security. They believe that if they could just acquire more of these external things, their anxiety would disappear. But here is what actually happens when such a person does acquire more. The anxiety does not disappear, it transforms. Instead of worrying about not having enough, they begin worrying about losing what they have. Instead of fearing poverty, they fear the return of poverty. Instead of being anxious about their inadequacy, they become anxious about maintaining their adequacy. The content of the worry changes, but the worry itself remains constant. This is because the worry was never really about money in the first place. It was about something much deeper, much more fundamental. It was about the basic question of whether life can be trusted, whether we are capable of meeting whatever challenges arise, whether we have value independent of our achievements. These are questions that money cannot answer because they exist in a dimension where money has no relevance. But we keep trying to use money to answer them anyway. We keep thinking that if we just accumulate enough, save enough, invest enough, we will finally feel secure. We keep believing that if we just achieve enough financial success, we will finally feel worthy. We keep hoping that if we just acquire enough possessions, we will finally feel complete. And in this hoping, this thinking, this believing, we miss the most important recognition of all. We already are secure in ways that have nothing to do with money. We already are worthy in ways that no amount of wealth can increase or decrease. We already are complete in ways that no possession can enhance or diminish. But we cannot see this abundance because we are looking in the wrong direction. It is like standing in a magnificent garden and staring at a photograph of flowers, wondering why you feel empty and disconnected from nature. The real flowers are all around you, perfuming the air, dancing in the breeze, offering their beauty freely. But you cannot see them because you have convinced yourself that only the photograph is real, only the representation has value, only the symbol can satisfy your longing for connection with beauty. This metaphor may seem overly poetic, but it captures something essential about our relationship with money. We are surrounded by wealth that costs nothing and requires no effort to obtain. The beauty of a sunset, the pleasure of a deep breath, the joy of laughter, the peace of a quiet moment, the love that flows between friends, the satisfaction of meaningful work, the wonder of learning something new. All of this is available to us always, regardless of our financial situation. Yet we have learned to overlook this freely given abundance in our pursuit of the artificial scarcity that money represents. We have trained ourselves to ignore the wealth that is always present in favor of the wealth that must be earned. We have taught ourselves to dismiss the riches that surround us in favor of the riches that we imagine will complete us. I want to tell you about another person who came to see me, a woman whose situation illustrates this point beautifully. She was what many would call middle class, neither wealthy nor poor, able to meet her needs but unable to afford many of her wants. She came to me because she felt constantly anxious about money, constantly worried that she did not have enough, constantly comparing her financial situation to that of others, and finding herself lacking. But as we began to explore her actual daily experience, something remarkable emerged. She lived in a comfortable home filled with books she loved to read. She had work that engaged her mind and contributed to her community. She had friends who cared about her, family members who loved her, interests that brought her pleasure. She was healthy, intelligent, creative, capable. Her life was rich with experiences that money cannot purchase and blessed with gifts that no bank account could provide. Yet she could not see any of this abundance because her attention was completely focused on what she lacked financially. She spent her days calculating what she could not afford rather than appreciating what she already possessed. She spent her evenings worrying about financial security rather than enjoying the security she actually had. She spent her mental energy comparing her situation to others rather than recognizing the unique richness of her own existence. This woman was not poor in any meaningful sense of the word. She was suffering from poverty consciousness, which is an entirely different thing. Poverty consciousness is the inability to recognize abundance when it is present. It is the habit of seeing scarcity everywhere, even in the midst of plenty. It is the learned incapacity to appreciate what is freely given in favor of obsessing over what must be earned. And here is the truly tragic aspect of poverty consciousness. It creates the very experience it fears. When you cannot see the abundance that surrounds you, when you cannot appreciate the wealth you already possess, when you cannot recognize the ways in which life is constantly providing for you, you feel poor, regardless of your actual circumstances. You experience scarcity even when living in plenty. You suffer from lack even when surrounded by gifts. This is why I say that the illusion of money traps us in poverty. Not because money itself is evil, but because our relationship to money prevents us from seeing the wealth that exists independent of money. We become so focused on accumulating what we think we need that we miss the recognition of what we already have. We become so anxious about financial security that we cannot enjoy the security that is always available to us. The security I speak of is not the security of knowing that nothing bad will ever happen. That kind of security is impossible and illusory. The security, I mean, is the deep knowing that whatever happens, you have the capacity to meet it. That whatever challenges arise, you possess the inner resources to respond to them. That whatever losses occur, something essential within you remains untouchable and whole. This security cannot be purchased because it is not a commodity. It cannot be accumulated because it is not external to you. It cannot be lost because it is not dependent on circumstances. It is the security of knowing who you are beyond all the roles you play, all the possessions you own, all the achievements you have collected. It is the security of being at home in your own skin, comfortable with your own existence, trusting in your own capacity to live whatever life brings to you. But this recognition requires something that most people are unwilling to do. It requires you to stop running toward imaginary security and start discovering the real security that is already present. It requires you to cease the endless pursuit of external validation and begin the patient work of internal validation. It requires you to quit trying to purchase peace of mind and start cultivating the peace that is always available within you. This shift is not easy because it asks you to give up the very strategies you have been using to feel safe in the world. It asks you to release your grip on the external supports you have been relying upon and discover the internal supports that have been there all along. It asks you to stop trying to control your circumstances and start learning to trust your ability to respond to whatever circumstances arise. I remember the moment when this recognition first dawned upon me with full clarity. I was walking through the forest near my home, worrying about some financial matter that seemed quite pressing at the time. The worry was consuming my attention so completely that I was barely aware of where I was or what surrounded me. Then something caused me to stop and truly look at where I was standing. I was surrounded by trees that had been growing for decades without any bank account, without any financial plan, without any worry about their economic security. They drew their nourishment from soil and sunlight and rain, none of which they had to purchase. They created their own beauty, their own shelter, their own contribution to the world without any reference to monetary value. They were completely secure in their existence, not because they had accumulated anything external to themselves, but because they were perfectly aligned with their own nature. In that moment, I realized how far I had wandered from my own nature in my pursuit of artificial security. I had been trying to solve the problem of existence through accumulation when existence itself was the solution. I had been seeking abundance in the marketplace when abundance was freely available in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness. I had been chasing shadows while standing in the light. This realization did not solve all my practical problems, did not eliminate all my financial concerns, did not make money irrelevant to my daily life, but it fundamentally changed my relationship to these things. They became smaller, less central, more manageable. They took their proper place as practical considerations rather than existential crises. They became tools to use rather than gods to worship. The curious thing is that when money takes its proper place in your life, when it becomes a servant rather than a master, it often flows more easily. Not because you have learned some secret of attraction, but because you are no longer approaching it from desperation. You are no longer trying to make it carry psychological weight it cannot bear. You are no longer asking it to provide what it cannot provide. When you understand that your security comes from within, you can take appropriate risks. When you know that your worth is not determined by your wealth, you can negotiate from strength rather than fear. When you recognize that your happiness is not dependent on your possessions, you can make decisions based on what truly serves your deepest interests rather than what serves your superficial desires. But perhaps most importantly, when you are no longer enslaved by the illusion of money, you become free to discover what you actually value, what you genuinely care about, what really matters to you. Beyond all the noise and distraction of financial anxiety, you become available to the deeper currents of meaning that run beneath the surface of material existence. You become capable of recognizing the true wealth that has been waiting patiently for your attention all along. This true wealth cannot be measured in numbers, cannot be compared to what others possess, cannot be stolen by thieves or diminished by economic collapse. It is the wealth of being fully alive, fully present, fully engaged with the mystery of your own existence. It is the wealth of loving and being loved, of creating and appreciating beauty, of learning and growing and contributing something meaningful to the world. This wealth asks nothing of you except that you recognize it. It requires no effort to acquire because you already possess it. It demands no payment because it is freely given. It needs no protection because it cannot be harmed. It is yours by birthright, yours by nature, yours simply because you exist. The recognition of this wealth is what frees you from the prison of financial anxiety. Not because money becomes unimportant, but because money takes its proper place among many other considerations. Not because you reject material comfort, but because you no longer depend on material comfort for your sense of well-being. Not because you become indifferent to practical concerns, but because practical concerns no longer define your identity or determine your peace of mind. When this recognition dawns, you discover something extraordinary. You have been wealthy all along. You have been secure all along. You have been free all along. The poverty, the insecurity, the enslavement were illusions created by a mind that had forgotten its own essential nature. And now, in this remembering, you are no longer trapped by these illusions. You are liberated not from your circumstances, but from your beliefs about your circumstances. This liberation does not guarantee that life will become easy or that challenges will disappear, but it does guarantee that you will meet whatever comes from a place of inner abundance rather than inner scarcity, from confidence rather than fear, from trust rather than desperation. And this changes everything, even when it appears to change nothing. For in the end, the question is not how much money you have, but how much life you are able to receive. The question is not how wealthy you appear to others, but how rich you feel in your own experience. The question is not whether you can purchase everything you want, but whether you can appreciate everything you have been given. These are questions that only you can answer, and you can only answer them by looking within rather than without, by paying attention to what is present rather than what is absent, by recognizing the abundance that surrounds you always rather than focusing on the scarcity that exists mainly in your imagination. The choice, as always, is yours. You can continue to chase the illusion and remain trapped in its poverty, or you can turn away from the illusion and discover the wealth that has been waiting for you all along, the wealth that cannot be earned because it is already yours, the wealth that cannot be lost because it is you, the wealth that cannot be earned because it is already yours, the wealth that cannot be lost because it is you. And yet, here we arrive at the most curious paradox of all. For when I speak to people about this recognition, when I suggest that they might already possess what they seek, I am often met with the most peculiar resistance. Not the resistance of disagreement, mind you, but something far more subtle. It is the resistance of a person who has become so accustomed to hunger that they have forgotten how to taste food. You see, there is something almost addictive about the pursuit itself, the endless striving, the constant calculation, the perpetual sense that fulfillment lies just around the next corner, just beyond the next achievement, just after the next accumulation. This pursuit has become so familiar, so much a part of one's identity, that the thought of abandoning it feels like a kind of death. I remember speaking with a merchant who had spent 40 years building his business, accumulating wealth, expanding his influence. When I suggested that he might find peace by recognizing the abundance he already possessed, he looked at me with genuine confusion. But then, what would I do? He asked. Who would I be if I were not pursuing more? This question revealed something profound about the human condition. This man had so completely identified himself with the role of pursuer that he could not imagine existing without something to pursue. He had become the chase itself, and the thought of arriving at his destination terrified him because it would mean the end of the only identity he knew. This is what I have come to understand about the modern predicament. We have not simply been trapped by the illusion of money. We have been seduced by the illusion of incompleteness itself. We have learned to find our meaning not in being who we are, but in becoming who we think we should be. Not in having what we have, but in acquiring what we believe we need. Not in appreciating the present moment, but in working toward a future moment that never quite arrives. The unconscious mind, you must understand, is remarkably clever in the ways it protects us from truths we are not ready to face. When I speak of the wealth you already possess, when I point toward the abundance that surrounds you. When I suggest that your seeking itself might be preventing you from finding, the unconscious quickly produces a dozen reasons why this cannot be true, why your situation is different, why your problems are more serious, why your needs are more urgent than those of others. These reasons are not lies, exactly. They contain elements of truth, but they are employed by the psyche in service of a deeper avoidance, the avoidance of the terrifying possibility that you might be enough as you are, that your life might be complete as it is, that your worth might be inherent rather than earned, that your security might be present rather than future, that your freedom might be internal rather than external. Why is this possibility terrifying? Because it would mean that all the running has been unnecessary, all the striving has been optional, all the anxiety has been self-created. It would mean that you have been carrying water in a leaky bucket when you were standing beside a flowing river all along. It would mean that you have been a wealthy person who believed himself poor, a free person who imagined himself imprisoned, a complete person who thought himself broken. And perhaps that is the most liberating recognition of all, that you have always been what you sought to become, that you have always possessed what you worked to acquire, that the journey toward wholeness was really a journey home to yourself. The illusion of money, you see, was never about money at all. It was about the deeper illusion that you were somehow insufficient, somehow incomplete, somehow less than what you needed to be. Money became the symbol of that imagined insufficiency, the promise of a completeness that was always already present. When you recognize this, truly recognize it, something shifts in the very foundation of your being, not because your circumstances change, but because your relationship to your circumstances transforms completely. You discover that you have been a king who believed himself a beggar, a rich man who thought himself poor, a whole person who imagined himself broken. This recognition asks nothing of you, except that you stop running long enough to see where you already are. Stop seeking long enough to discover what you already possess. Stop becoming long enough to be who you already are. The wealth you seek is not waiting for you in some distant future. It is here, now, in this very moment, closer to you than your own breath. You need not earn it, for it is freely given. You cannot lose it, for it is you. This is the end of poverty, the end of seeking, the end of the beautiful, terrible illusion that kept you searching for what was never lost.